The air inside the courtroom felt like it could break at any moment. Every breath, every heartbeat, every glance carried the weight of history. Reporters leaned forward, pens ready to capture every word. Victims' families clutched photographs of loved ones, their hands trembling. Supporters whispered prayers under their breath. And at the center of it all sat one man who once ruled the music world, now facing the judgment that could end it all. Millions weren't just watching the courthouse steps, they were waiting for the truth. Would power still protect him, or would justice finally break through? The room itself felt suffocating, as if the walls had pulled in to trap every soul inside. The defense table was silent, but the whispers from the gallery carried more weight than any gavel. Some spoke of mercy. Others demanded nothing less than the harshest sentence possible. Reporters sat shoulder to shoulder, their notepads shaking under the pressure of what they were about to record. Each tick of the clock seemed to echo louder, stretching the suspense. Victims' families sat in the front rows, their faces lined with years of grief, clutching tissues and photographs that had become symbols of lives forever changed. But just as powerful were the quiet prayers of Diddy's supporters, scattered through the crowd. Some kept their eyes shut tight, murmuring silently, convinced the man they idolized could still walk away free. Others simply stared forward, frozen between loyalty and fear. And through it all, Diddy sat motionless, his head bowed, his hands clasped so tightly together his knuckles turned white. For a man once surrounded by flashing cameras and roaring stadiums, the silence here was more terrifying than any stage he'd ever stepped on. Because everyone knew, when the judge finally spoke, there would be no encore. The silence broke with the sound of shoes clicking against polished wood. The prosecutor rose from his chair, his movements slow but deliberate, as if each step carried the weight of 1,000 voices demanding justice. His suit was sharp, but his expression was sharper, cold, unflinching, and brimming with purpose. He stopped at the center of the courtroom, his gaze sweeping across the jury box, the gallery, and finally locking onto Diddy. When he spoke, his voice sliced through the silence like a blade. "Your Honor," he began, steady and controlled, "today isn't about fame. It isn't about wealth. Today is about accountability." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Victims' families gripped their seats tighter, their eyes burning with silent pleas. The prosecutor's voice grew stronger with every word. "For years," he said, his tone rising, "Sean Combs lived as though the rules didn't apply to him. Money, influence, power. He believed they would shield him forever. But no man, no matter how famous, no matter how powerful, is above the law." The words struck like thunder, and the room reacted instantly. Some families wept, others clenched their fists. Even supporters lowered their heads. The prosecutor didn't stop. He turned toward the front row, pointing gently to the women whose faces were pale and stained with tears. "They deserve justice," he declared, his voice cracking with controlled fury. "Every single one of them, every family who suffered, every life that was broken. And today, this courtroom has the chance to prove that justice cannot be bought." He let the words hang, heavy and undeniable, before stepping back slightly. The room was frozen, as if the air itself had been locked inside his argument. And just as the tension reached its peak, he delivered the blow everyone had feared. "We are asking for the maximum sentence, not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. Because anything less would tell the world that power still decides justice. And in this courtroom, that cannot stand." The silence that followed was deafening. Diddy's jaw tightened, his fingers twitched. His supporters prayed harder, and his mother wept quietly in the second row. But the prosecutor had made it clear. The empire was crumbling, and no amount of fame could stop it. When the prosecutor's final words faded, the room sat frozen. Then, slowly, another figure rose. Marcus Hill, Diddy's lead attorney, straightened his tie and walked toward the podium. Every eye followed him, searching for a lifeline, for a glimmer of hope that could pull his client back from the edge. He placed both hands firmly on the podium, pausing just long enough to let the silence work in his favor. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, measured, but filled with conviction. "Your Honor," he began, "the prosecution wants you to believe Sean Combs is nothing but his mistakes, that everything he's built, every life he's touched, every opportunity he's created, can be erased and reduced to one dark narrative. But that is not the man sitting before you today." He turned briefly toward Diddy, who sat motionless, his hands trembling in his lap, his head bowed so low his chin nearly touched the table. "Sean Combs is a father, a son, a man who for decades has uplifted others, funding schools, creating careers, giving back to communities. Does that erase the wrongs? Number. But justice isn't about erasing a person. It's about balance." His voice softened, carrying the weight of every corner of the room. He glanced toward the victims' families, his expression sincere. "To those who've suffered," he said, "Sean Combs hears you. He cannot undo the past, and he carries that pain with him every single day. But must a life defined by mistakes be denied the chance for redemption?" The gallery shifted uneasily. Some faces hardened with anger, others wavered with uncertainty. Still, Marcus pressed on. "This is not a man beyond saving," he continued, his voice stronger now. "This is a man stripped of everything, power, fame, privilege, and left only with the hope that he can still do better. Prison will punish, yes, but will it heal? Or can we demand accountability while still leaving space for restoration?" Behind him, Diddy's mother wept softly into a tissue, her shoulders trembling. His children sat clutching each other's hands, their small faces pale with fear. Marcus's voice dropped to almost a whisper, but it carried like thunder through the silence. "Your Honor, Sean Combs has fallen. What remains is a man who finally understands he is human, flawed, fragile, accountable. Give him the chance to rise again, not for the empire he once ruled, but for the man he can still become." When he finished, the silence was absolute. Marcus lowered his eyes and returned to his seat, leaving the weight of his plea hanging in the air like smoke. And for the first time, the balance of the courtroom seemed to teeter, between justice and mercy, between punishment and redemption. The courtroom was still. Not the kind of silence that feels calm, but the kind that presses on your chest, heavy and suffocating. All eyes turned to the bench as Judge Aaron Subramanian adjusted his glasses and folded his hands neatly in front of him. His expression was unreadable, carved from stone. When he finally spoke, his voice was deep and deliberate, carrying across the chamber like a slow drumbeat. "Mr. Combs," he began, his gaze sweeping from the defense table to the front rows of grieving families, "you stand before this court not as a celebrity, not as an icon, but as a man. And as a man, you are accountable for your actions." The words hung in the air like lead. Diddy lifted his head slightly, his red, bloodshot eyes meeting the judge's for just a moment before darting back down. "I have heard the prosecution," the judge continued, his tone measured but sharp. "I have listened to the defense. I have read the testimonies, the statements, the pleas for mercy, and the cries for justice. And let me be clear. This decision is not one I take lightly. But justice is not a popularity contest. Justice does not bow to influence, and in this courtroom, justice must speak louder than power." A ripple of murmurs swept through the gallery. Victims' families nodded silently, some wiping tears. Supporters shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The judge leaned forward, his voice colder now, cutting through the air like a blade. "For years, you built an empire. Music, fame, wealth, an image of untouchability. But behind the curtain there were choices. Choices that hurt people. Choices that destroyed lives. And today, you must face those choices. Gasps echoed through the room. Diddy's lawyer placed a steadying hand on his client's shoulder, but Diddy barely moved, his body trembling slightly under the weight of the words. "Understand this, Mr. Combs," the judge said, his voice suddenly rising, sharper now. "Fame does not grant immunity, wealth does not rewrite the law, and no man, not even you, stands above justice." The gallery erupted in whispers, some gasping audibly, others clutching each other's hands in silent relief. Diddy swallowed hard, his eyes glassy, his breathing shallow. The judge's final words fell like thunder. "In this courtroom, you are no different than any other man who has stood where you are standing now." And with that, the weight of the moment shifted. It was no longer about music, fame, or power. It was about one man standing naked before justice, with no shield left to hide behind. The judge's words cut deeper than any headline, deeper than any rumor or accusation, and for the first time in hours, all eyes turned back to Diddy. His lawyer leaned in, whispering softly, urging him to rise. Slowly, with legs trembling under the weight of everything pressing down, Diddy pushed himself up from his chair. The sound of his seat scraping against the polished floor echoed through the chamber like thunder. His head was bowed, his hands clenched tightly together, his knuckles pale. When he finally looked up, his lips parted, but no sound came out at first. His chest rose and fell sharply, as though each breath was a struggle.
Then, in a voice cracked and unsteady, he began. "Your Honor, I know I've made mistakes. I know I've hurt people. And I know there are things I can't ever take back, no matter how much I wish I could." The words trembled from his mouth, heavy and raw. Victims' families stared, some with cold, unblinking eyes, others shaking silently as tears welled up. One woman gripped a photograph so tightly the frame bent under her fingers. Diddy turned slightly toward the gallery, his voice breaking. "To everyone I've hurt, I'm sorry. I've been sorry every single day. I hear you. I see you. And I will carry that pain with me for the rest of my life." For a moment, the silence was unbearable. Some lowered their heads, refusing to look at him. Others watched him closely, searching for sincerity or weakness. His gaze returned to the bench, his eyes glistening under the harsh lights. "I spent my life building an empire. I gave back where I could. I tried to create opportunities. But somewhere along the way, I lost myself. I let my ego, my fame, my power blind me. And now, I stand here stripped of all of that." He paused, his voice dropping almost to a whisper. "I'm just a man now." The words cracked through the silence like glass shattering. His lawyer placed a hand gently on his shoulder, but Diddy didn't respond. His focus stayed locked on the bench. "I'm not asking to walk away free," he continued, desperation creeping into his tone. "I'm not asking for my past to be erased. All I'm asking for is a chance to prove I can be better, a chance to fix what pieces I still can before it's too late." His eyes shifted toward his children, seated behind him. Tears streamed down their small faces as they clung to each other. Diddy's voice cracked again, softer now. "I have kids, Your Honor. People who still look up to me, who still believe in me. Please don't take away the rest of my life without giving me the chance to show them I can change." The tears spilled freely now, streaking his face as his hands shook uncontrollably. When the words finally left his lips, "Please, have mercy," the room seemed to stop breathing altogether. And for the first time, Even his fiercest critics felt the weight of his desperation. For a moment, the courtroom was silent after Diddy's plea. His words lingered in the air, trembling with desperation. But then the stillness cracked. From the front row, a woman rose to her feet, her hands shaking as she clutched a worn photograph. Her voice was weak at first, but it carried like thunder through the chamber. "Do you have any idea," she demanded, her words trembling, "what your choices cost us? What they took from us?" Her chest rose sharply as her tear-streaked eyes locked onto him. "You ruined lives, Sean Combs. Families. Futures. And now you stand here, asking for mercy." The gallery shifted uncomfortably. Some turned away, unable to watch. Others stared at Diddy with burning eyes, their grief reigniting into fury. Suddenly, a man on the opposite side of the room shot to his feet, his voice breaking with rage. "My brother's life is gone because of you," he shouted, slamming his fist against the railing so hard the sound cracked like lightning. "You think your fame, your money, any of it, makes this okay?" Chaos rippled through the room. Gasps, murmurs. Reporters scribbled frantically, pens scratching against paper, as the moment unfolded like wildfire. "Order!" Judge Subramanian's voice boomed, and marshals stepped forward instantly, restoring silence with their sheer presence. But the emotions could not be contained. From the end of the row, a younger woman finally spoke, her voice softer than a whisper, but sharper than any scream. "Do you know what it's like," she said through tears, "to wake up every day and feel the emptiness of someone who's never coming back? To live every second knowing one person's choices shattered your entire world." Her words broke into sobs as she buried her face in her hands. The sound filled the courtroom more loudly than shouting ever could. The room sat in heavy silence once more. For all of Diddy's power, his empire, his legacy, he couldn't answer. He couldn't undo what had been spoken. And as the victims' voices faded into the stillness, it became clear. This wasn't just about one man on trial. It was about the scars left on everyone who had lived in the shadow of his choices. The air in the courtroom grew heavier with every passing second. Victims' voices still echoed in everyone's minds, their pain carved into the silence. All eyes turned back to the bench as Judge Subramanian adjusted the file in front of him, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Combs," he said, his deep voice steady but commanding, "please rise and face the court." The scrape of Diddy's chair against the polished floor rang out like thunder. His legs trembled beneath him, his hands clasped tightly as though clinging to the last thread of hope. Reporters leaned forward, their pens frozen above paper. Families gripped tissues, their knuckles white. Supporters held their breath. The judge paused deliberately, letting the weight of the moment press on every chest in the room. "I have considered every piece of evidence," he said slowly, "every testimony, every plea for mercy. And I have heard the cries of those who suffered. Justice cannot bend for influence, nor break beneath wealth. No man stands above the law, not even you." Gasps whispered through the gallery. Some nodded, others wept silently. Diddy lifted his head slightly, his lips trembling, his chest rising with shallow, uneven breaths. The judge turned the final page of the file, rested his hand on it, and locked eyes with him. "Therefore," he said firmly, his words cutting through the silence like steel, "it is the judgment of this court that you, Sean Combs, are hereby sentenced to 16 years in federal prison. For a heartbeat, time stopped. The words seemed to hang in the air, suspended, as if the entire world was holding its breath. Then the room erupted, gasps, cries, sobs muffled behind trembling hands. Reporters scribbled furiously, some shouting into their phones to break the story before anyone else. Families clung to each other, some collapsing into tears of relief, others staring ahead in stunned disbelief. At the defense table, Diddy staggered slightly, his grip on the wood tightening, as though it were the only thing holding him upright. His face went pale, his eyes empty. His lawyer leaned in, whispering frantically. But Diddy didn't respond. He just stood there, motionless, as if the weight of 16 years had already fallen on his shoulders. The judge wasn't finished. He raised his hand for silence, his tone colder than before. "This court also orders immediate remand," he declared. "Mr. Combs will begin serving his sentence today. Bail is denied." The words landed like a hammer blow. Marshals stepped forward instantly, their boots echoing across the wooden floor with every step. The sound of steel cuffs being readied cut through the chaos, sharp and final. Diddy turned his head, searching the gallery until his eyes found his children. Their small faces were streaked with tears, their cries muffled into the shoulders of loved ones. He tried to smile faintly, a broken, trembling attempt, but his lips barely moved before falling back into silence. And in that moment, the man who once ruled stages, charts, and boardrooms was no longer untouchable. He was just another name on a prison sentence. The words still echoed in the chamber when the marshals closed in. The cold clink of steel cuffs cut through the air, sealing Diddy's fate. He didn't resist. He didn't argue. He simply lowered his head, as though surrendering not just to the shackles, but to everything that had led him here. Behind him, his mother collapsed into sobs, her shoulders shaking as family members tried to comfort her. His children clung desperately to each other, their cries breaking what little silence remained. The gallery was divided, some families weeping with relief, others unable to look away from the man who had once seemed larger than life. Back inside, Diddy turned for one final look at the gallery. His eyes found his children in the third row. Their small hands clung together, their faces wet with tears. He tried to form a smile, but it collapsed before it reached his lips. His attorney sat motionless at the defense table, head bowed, his fight spent. The marshals led him down a narrow, dimly lit hallway, away from the flashing lights, the chants, the noise. For the first time in decades, there were no bodyguards, no entourage, no cameras clamoring for his attention. It was just Sean Combs, the man, not the mogul, walking into a future he could no longer control. And as the black transport van pulled away from the courthouse, swallowed by a storm of flashing lights and screaming headlines, the reality settled in. This wasn't just a sentencing. It was a fall so massive, it shook the music industry, the fans, and an entire generation that had once looked up to him.
The courtroom eventually emptied, but the weight of what had happened lingered like smoke that refused to clear. Outside, the noise raged on. Chants, headlines, live streams, endless debates about what the verdict meant. Some called it justice. Others called it betrayal. But inside those walls where the gavel had fallen, there was no debate, only finality. For Sean Combs, the empire he had built, decades of music, business, and influence, was gone in a single sentence. 16 years, 16 birthdays missed, 16 summers and winters spent behind bars. The man who once stood at the top of an industry was now reduced to a number in the federal system. But beyond the sentence itself lay a deeper truth, one that stretched far beyond him. It was a reminder that fame does not erase responsibility, that wealth cannot buy forgiveness, and that the choices we make will always carry weight, no matter who we are. The world will remember the flashing lights, the headlines, the fall from grace. But for the families in that courtroom, the story wasn't about an empire collapsing. It was about lives forever altered, pain that could never be undone, and a small measure of justice finally delivered. And maybe that's the part that matters most. Not the music, not the fame, but the lesson left behind. In the end, when the lights fade and the cameras stop rolling, we are all judged by the choices we make. For Sean Combs, those choices led him here, into silence, into chains, and into a future no amount of power could change.